All right, this is Dark Days Radio. I'm one of your hosts, Mike, and tonight I'm joined by Chigg. How's it going, Chigg?
You know, it's going pretty well, Mike. How are things up there in the frozen Northlands?
Very warm. Actually, this past weekend it was horribly, horribly frigid. -7 degrees. I took out the car for a little spin, and like the shifter and the clutch were like barely functioning at that temperature. It was the viscosity definitely changed in the clutch fluid, but I survived, and it sounds like you're surviving down in the bleak steppes of Texas.
The blasted wasteland that is my home. Yeah, we're doing all right.
That is what it looks like. Oh my gosh. Well, it's great to have you here. Really excited for this episode because we're going to be talking about dark fantasy RPG alternatives tonight because there's been a lot going on in the RPG industry lately. So why don't we just get to the news then?
Let's.
All right, Chigg, so the industry is on fire. Everyone's been talking about it. Wizards of the Coast decided that they were going to try to change and significantly modify the open gaming license. And, well, this may come as a shock to nobody at all, but people don't like having their rights taken away in a really blatant manner. And, well, there was quite a bit of outrage. They backpedaled, but it seems like a lot of other game publishers are really able to capitalize on this. It seems like they're doing really well, right, Chigg?
Right. I mean, one man's fire is another man's fire sale. Green Ronin, Evil Hat, Free League, and other small publishers are making sales right now just hand over fist. January, which is January of 2023 for those listening to the back episodes, is when all of this really kind of boiled over for Wizards of the Coast. And that was the biggest month of sales for those companies in history.
Yeah, Pathfinder sold out everything, all their core books. I was looking online at eBay, and it was like, the auctions were going for $80 a book. Buy it now is for like $120. It was, it was crazy, and it still is crazy because you can't find Pathfinder books at the moment. Definitely PDFs though. That's certainly an option. And a lot of other things going on. Onyx Path has been selling stuff, and they have Pathfinder Scarred Lands as well. I think that's for Pathfinder First Edition, but that's also a pretty cool option as well. So a lot of stuff going on, and that's going to be the focus of this episode tonight, which is just talking about different alternative RPGs for dark fantasy. So if there's no other news, Chigg,
I think that's kind of dominated the newsosphere for the games industry here recently. So
yeah, certainly.
Anything else got swept under the rug.
Yep. So let's just move on over to that main segment talking about dark fantasy alternative RPGs.
Well, before we go,
what?
Let's lay down some criteria here.
Okay.
What exactly are we talking about when we say alternative dark fantasy RPGs?
Absolutely. So going into this episode, Chigg, I wanted to, recommend to people some new fantasy games. Wizards of the Coast is big, and a lot of people are recommending Pathfinder as the alternative to go to. And yeah, I understand if you want a dungeon attrition kind of role-playing game, with that kind of toolbox methodology, that's great if you want to go with Pathfinder. But a lot of the people, they actually really do care about having story and other things for their spooky games, their horror games, their dark fantasy. So if you're a fan of D&D's Ravenloft or Pathfinder's Carrion Crown, we wanted to set out games that would be a good alternative with different systems. So the criteria that we went with here is that the game needs to have swords, needs to have magic, it's got to have dark fantasy or horror themes. It cannot be 5th edition or a D20 based game. That being like, D&D derivative D20. Some games do use D20s.
The F20 system, as Robin D. Laws calls it.
Ah, interesting. Right. and it needs to be currently supported. So that's another big criteria right there. Do you think that's a good rule set to go with for this episode, Chig?
I think that is a good set of criteria, and now the audience knows what they're in for. So let's begin.
Absolutely. Okay.
What's the first game?
All right. So this is one that I actually just sold my book for, and I'm kind of regretting it. And it's a game called Accursed. So it's a heroic dark fantasy RPG where you get to play as monstrous witch-marked, attempting to throw off the shackles of your oppressors. So in the land of Morden, Chig, it was invaded by the witches and their monstrous allies, who now rule over the fearful human populace. Fortunately for humanity, though, a few of the created or transformed monsters struggle to retain their humanity and fight back against the witches. Characters take the form of several trope monsters, from vampires to mummies to alchemical golems to gorgons. And Accursed is a Savage Worlds game, which actually has a free update for the Adventure Edition on DriveThruRPG. There's tons of free and inexpensive adventures, too, but unfortunately, the core book PDF is not currently available on DriveThruRPG. And looking around on eBay and other things, the hardcover is a bit pricey. It's like a pretty thin book, and it's like $40. So, they don't have the cheaper option at the moment for whatever reason. But it's a cool game if you really want to have that kind of, action-focused dark fantasy game that you might see with, high-level Ravenloft or Pathfinder. It does run off of Savage Worlds, which is not everyone's favorite RPG system. But if you want something that's very, very story-driven and quick, it's definitely a good option, especially if you like those kinds of universal monster and hammer horror tropes. Chig, have you checked out this game ever?
I have not. I didn't think I'd heard of it until you started getting into it, and then that kind of jogged a little bit of a memory. And when you said Savage Worlds, I'm like, oh yeah, that's why I didn't get into it, because I am one of those for whom it is not.
Indeed.
It's fine. I've come to terms with that.
Yeah. No, it's a cool game, and it's by Ross Watson and also Andy Chambers of Warhammer 40,000 fame. Worked on quite a few of the early source books, so it's definitely a really cool one. It's definitely more heroic in focus. And Chig, for our second offering for tonight, I think you got something here that's a bit more down and dirty.
Just a bit. So longtime listeners of the show will know that I'm a huge fan of Blades in the Dark. Band of Blades is a Forged in the Dark game that uses the light mechanics of Blades to showcase military campaigns, specifically fantasy military campaigns. So you're in a military unit known as the Legion that is fleeing to Skydagger Keep, where you are going to confront the biggest bad in the world, the Cinder King. Your Legion is undermanned, ill-equipped, tired, dirty, and in desperate need of a break that is not coming. The Cinder King's minions are hot on your tail, and the fate of the world rests in your hands. So unlike a lot of RPGs where you create a character, you play that character, you do that here in Band of Blades. But in addition to that, and instead of having downtime like other Forged in the Dark games, such as Blades in the Dark, during what would be your downtime, you have campaign planning time, where you take on the role of kind of a meta role, where somebody will be the Legion commander, and they'll decide what the next mission is. Somebody else will be the marshal of the Legion, who will manage squadrons of NPCs and send them out on sorties and to get more provisions. And that'll determine how well your next PC's mission will start. Are they well equipped? Are they starving? Are they in need of a bath? Stuff like that. And somebody will play the quartermaster. That's the person who allocates the resources that the marshals NPCs bring back. And so in addition to that, like I said, you do have a regular character, and that can range from just a foot soldier, a grunt, a sergeant, to, after a bit of training and a bit of attrition higher in the ranks, you can work your way up and you can become a heavy weapon specialist, a demolitionist or other specialized roles in the squadron. In the end, what remains of your legion, and you should not become too terribly attached to your characters because attrition is a thing that will happen. What remains of your legion might make it to Skydagger Keep. They might even defeat the Cinder King. They could save the world. It's not technically impossible.
Yeah, this seems pretty grim dark, Chigg. And, being based off of Blades in the Dark, does this game really make good use of the clock system that Blades was so famous for?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, is that how it tracks like you being chased by and hounded by the minions of the Cinder King, for example?
In addition to that, it's how you keep track of how your NPCs are doing. If they're setting up a good enough entryway for you to get past the giant minions that are guarding the valley you have to travel through. It's how they keep track of the quartermaster's supplies. You don't keep track of every nail and every ham hock that you bring in. You fill up a clock's worth of food, or you deplete a clock's worth of water.
Nice, I like it. Yeah, actually, that's a great use of the clocks to track resources like that. That'd be really good used if you were to reskin this for, say, like Dark Sun, for example.
Oh, absolutely. And I recommend that if you're going to play a game and you need to keep track of basically anything, clocks, they're where it's at.
Yep.
So I know that one of the criteria that we had was currently supported, but it looks like the next thing the next game that you're recommending, Mike, is a bit of an older one.
It is older, but it is still currently supported because Earthdawn 5th edition came out a couple years ago, and it's still being supported and sold by the new version of FASA Games. So Earthdawn is the classic fantasy precursor to Shadowrun, and while not inherently dark fantasy, we'll discuss how to introduce those elements later.
Now, you say it's not inherently dark fantasy, but I mean, it has the horrors, it has the blood elves. Those alone are enough to make it dark fantasy.
I concur, and we can have that debate a little bit later, but let's introduce this setting to those that are not familiar with it. So, when the Scourge came, the people of the world fled underground, holed up in magically fortified cares for hundreds of years. These being basically underground, I guess you could call them vaults, maybe, that were constructed by the dwarves and enchanted with magic by many of the different species in the world. However, the horrors, of course, ravaged the entire world and hunted most of those that were too foolish to hide. Many cares did not hold, some were broken into, destroyed, but others, of course, did survive. And when the survivors emerged, they found a land that was broken and twisted, pockmarked with ruins, where the horrors still dwelt. And Earthdawn is a high fantasy but post-apocalyptic setting that will naturally blend with fantasy role-playing tropes like magical items and dungeons, kind of combining that setting with the game mechanics themselves and those fantasy tropes. The game uses a proprietary step system that mixes polyhedron dice for some pretty interesting effects. I would say that Earthdawn is easy to convert into a dark fantasy game. You just need to really tone down some of the high fantasy technology, like airships, while leaning into the post-apocalyptic desperation. And Chigg mentions the Blood Elves, which are really cool and we should definitely focus on. These are elves who did not flee the horrors and instead, became cursed with a thorned skin that can really drive home those dark fantasy elements.
Okay, so you say that they were cursed with thorned skin, but that's not really true in the traditional sense. They didn't upset a wizard or, steal from a witch or anything, and they were cursed with thorned skin. They chose not to flee underground with the dwarves because they thought that their magic would be able to hold off the horrors. And they were wrong. They were super wrong because horrors feed on magic. So they did a ritual to themselves. And because they are now in a state of constant agony, the horrors can't get anything that they want out of them because the horrors feed on suffering. So there's no suffering left in these elves for anyone else. It's super messed up.
Yeah, it is. It's very black metal, very black metal. But it kind of shows the interesting features of the setting, where the choices of these different individuals have consequences. Those that fled underground into the cares, well, they kind of abandoned the world to be ravaged and destroyed, twisted by the horrors. The blood elves, they decide to come up with their own magical ritual, but well, it worked, but not the way they intended it to. And through their hubris, well, now they're in a state of constant suffering. And of course, others still are no longer existent. They were consumed by the horrors themselves. So it's a very interesting setting in that regard, just looking at the choices that different species made, and the after effects that come from the 100 years of the horrors. And then the rebuilding and the large empire that's threatening everyone. One of the cool things about Earthdawn is it's actually set in the real world, right? Because it's the precursor to Shadowrun. The modern, not the modern equivalent of where the game is set is actually Ukraine, and the Blood Elves in the Blood Wood is actually in the location of where the Chernobyl power plant is, which is a interesting little nod right there.
It's a fun coincidence, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's not many other there's no cultural connections really, but it is it's just kind of interesting. It's not a place you usually see fantasy games set, even fantasy games correlated to the real world.
They started with Earth, and then they broke it.
Indeed. So, Chigg, kind of following up the real world discussion, let's talk about historical horror games, because there's a lot of them. And I really like these games because they're great for their near infinite lore. It's a mixture of game material and human history. Of course, this can make them a bit daunting to plan and run, since you may feel like you need to read a giant rule book and then also a couple library books. I would say that you shouldn't fret too much about the history. If you have a particularly engaged player who likes history, you can also outsource some of the research to them once you start the game. So that can kind of help lessen the burden.
Absolutely.
Yep.
This is a trick that I learned running historical games with my group. One guy is just a history nut. So I said, hey, I'm going to give your character the equivalent of 3 dots in local lore. So if ever you need to provide a fact to me, you just roll that right up and you tell me what I'm doing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And he's happy to tell me what I'm doing wrong.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, and that's a great use right there. So let's talk about a couple of example games. First off, this is Dark Days Radio, so top of the list, Dark Ages Vampire. Absolutely Dark Ages Vampire. And also has the companion books that came out for mages, werewolves, inquisitors, and fae. These are primarily set between 1197 and 1230, and primarily set in Europe. I really like them. There's a lot of books that were produced for Vampire and a couple for each of the others, with a lot of really interesting material. The research in those is a bit hit or miss. Sometimes they had writers that did tons of research and really poured through those library books. Other times they have vampires who were Muslim before the time of Muhammad. So,
don't feel bad about not doing the most research you possibly could, because what you're doing at home is fine for your table. You didn't get published by saying that there were Muslim vampires before Muhammad. So
yeah, exactly. But man, there's just some great stuff in there. We've had tons of episodes about Dark Ages Vampire that you can go back and check. Dark Ages Mage, Chigg and I did a great episode on that a couple years ago. And I love the system in that game. I think it's better than Basic Mage.
The pillars.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Foundations and Pillars, really good. We've even covered Dark Ages Inquisitor. That was Vince and Mark way back in the day in episode 2. Talked about that one. And we've never talked about Dark Ages Fae. And we'll just move on from there.
It's a book that exists.
Maybe we'll cover it someday, but it's... So, what are some other historical horror games? Well, running with the Dark Ages theme, there's also Cthulhu Dark Ages. It's another cool option, which allows for mythos investigations in 10th century England. It's very, very similar to the regular Call of Cthulhu 7th edition system. There's actually a previous version, which I think was for 6th edition. And it's really neat and use the same basic rules, but you really need to be careful about your sanity, because it's even harder to recover your sanity than in a 1920s game, which is already very difficult to get any back. There's no sanitarium that you can go to in the Dark Ages games.
Well, while we're talking about Call of Cthulhu, they've recently released, also for the current edition, Cthulhu Invictus. If playing in the 10th century is just too modern for you for your historical gaming, Cthulhu Invictus is set in the 1st century CE, and it invites you to explore a dark and benighted world from the imagined safety of the strongest empire on the planet, the Roman Empire. So whether you're an apothecary who's trading bodies for forbidden knowledge to the ghouls in Alexandria, a centurion huddled around a fire for warmth in a cold, wet island on the edge of the world, wary of the clans to the north, as well as the ancient horrors that those clans can barely hold at bay, or a gladiator in the fighting pits, tasked with killing for the amusement of the citizenry. Players of all kinds are sure to find some kind of Cthulhuvian excitement here in the ancient world. Like Mike said, be careful about your sanity. There are very few psychiatrists in ancient Rome.
Indeed, yeah. I would say there's 0 psychiatrists. You go to a wise woman and maybe get some advice, maybe get some way to gain your sanity back, but more often than not, she...
Just rub some ergot on it, you'll be fine. You'll be fine, walk it off.
Oh, I was going to say she could be a cultist, but no, Cthulhu Invictus is great. And, a lot of the historical games we just mentioned are very European-focused, obviously. And there's other dark fantasy options out there that have less of a focus on, say, Western Europe. A great option for that would be checking out the Dark Eras sourcebook for Chronicles of Darkness. This has all sorts of different historical settings, from things in the United States to Australia to the Middle East or Western Asia, Africa. A lot of really cool, interesting options that give you a lot of variety for that really cool horror gaming system.
And if you enjoy the Chronicle of Darkness game lines, there's a lot of built-in crossover in those historical settings.
There is, yeah. It's really great. Getting away from Western Europe a little bit, let's talk about Legend of the Five Rings. So, Legend of the Five Rings focuses on courtly intrigue and dynastic politics in a fantasy East Asian setting. But there's a dark fantasy element that has always pervaded in the setting. So the Empire of Rokugan has stood for over 1,100 years and has always been threatened by the creatures of the Shadowlands. The Crab Clan Bushi stand vigilant on the Carpenter Wall, watching for demonic invaders and staving off the hellish taint using jade shards. Sometimes, though, samurai, adventurers, or ronin need to venture into the depths of the Shadowlands, rescuing kidnapped children before they succumb to the taint, or stopping blood speaker mages from enacting foul rituals. And of course, these could be your stories. Legend of the Five Rings, 5th edition, runs off of a proprietary system similar to Genesis or the Edge of the Empire, Star Wars role-playing games, using custom dice and systems for creating success and strife. So it's really it's a real classic role-playing game with a lot of followers, a lot of people really excited about it. Fantasy Flight heavily revised Legend of the Five Rings with that 5th edition, really kind of reset the timeline, and it strove to amend some of the missteps that had occurred in the 90s with other writers. But that said, even the 5th edition is not written by many East Asian voices, so there's a bit of weirdness in it, especially about the honor rules and the unmasking mechanic. you can still play the game, and you can have a ton of fun with it. But what we're going to do is we're going to link a very good analysis done by the Asians Represent podcast, where they read through the entire book and kind of highlighted any issues of tension. It really seems like there were some little text pieces that they didn't like, but really the honor rules and the unmasking mechanic are really the two things that stood out. While I generally recommend using the revised 5th edition of Legend of the Five Rings, you can actually still mine the older editions for some pretty heavy metal plot hooks. Stuff like a corrupted crab daimyo crucifying their own son to be a war banner, people chopping off hands to equip corrupted gauntlets, and an emperor's son being hidden and educated in hell for 20 years. There's some cool stuff in there.
So did he get his MBA from hell?
Just about. Yeah, in the old setting, he got spat out of hell at some point, and basically went to create his own kind of like dark clan to stand against all the others, which became the Spider Clan. But he helped the Empire, he hindered the Empire, and was a pretty important character, Daigotsu, for quite some time. Pretty rad, pretty cool. So that's what I have to say about Legend of the Five Rings. Chigg, have you ever played L5R or? I
have not. I've never played it.
Really? Cool. It's an interesting one. I like it, but it's got a history to it, and I think it's good to kind of go with eyes wide open when you interact with Legend of the Five Rings.
Yeah, there's never been a lot of Asians in my gaming group, just because of not a lot of Asians in my area that I'm friends with. So I was never really wanting to jump in on that for reasons that you illustrated previously about, doesn't have a lot of Asian writers. I don't want to. It's not my thing.
Yeah, understood. I don't want to recommend this book because we're trying to not recommend 5th edition, like D&D 5th edition stuff. But they did release a D20 Adventures in Rokugan book, which was written by a lot more East Asian voices, and also takes a lot of strides to make adjustments to the setting to make it more culturally sensible in a way that even the 5th edition did not do. So, I think ideally you'd want to run the 5th edition, L5R 5th edition rules by Fantasy Flight, in conjunction with that Adventures in Rokugan setting, and then I think you pretty much have the ultimate product there. Maybe they'll make a 6th edition in the near future, which kind of combines everything, and that'd be really great. But
I hear
we'll see what happens.
That Edge Publishing is now picking up the RPGs that used to belong to Fantasy Flight. So
yep.
maybe we got something to look forward to.
Yeah, they're actually the ones who made the Adventures in Rokugan book. So and have released. Yeah, they're also releasing the Fantasy Flight rule system version of 5th edition as well. So they haven't made that synthesis yet, but hopefully they will soon. But anyway, Chigg, I think we talked enough about L5R.
Yeah, let's move away from all that courtly intrigue, baloney, and dynastic politics. We're moving over to the heaviest metal RPG.
Oh, yeah.
The blackest metal RPG currently on the market. I'm talking about Mork Borg. Mork Borg is, for those of you who are unaware, it is a newer game that is, as soon as it came out the gate, had already spawned dozens of plugins, different character classes, settings, adventures, add-ons, spin-offs, using the very simple system for other genres, the whole shebang. We're going to focus now on the original, Mork Borg, which means Dark Castle in Swedish. It is a black, almost to the point of humor RPG of dungeon delving, murder hoboing, rules light fun at the end of the world. The setting, what very little of it there is in this tiny little 96-page book that's mostly charts, is pure black metal album cover in which you play a horrible person fighting monsters for pitiful rewards because the alternative is to be that monster's next meal. What's the history of the world? Bleak. What's the future look like for this world? Even bleaker.
Yeah.
The world is ending. There's a page where you determine how much time is left in the world. It could be a couple years. It could be a few days. What can you do about the world ending? Not much. So you better grab your randomly generated weapons, armor, and equipment and get while the getting's good. So hey, roll yourself up a wretched royal or a gutter-born scum, maybe even an esoteric hermit, and try your best to go out there, stop the apocalypse, save the world.
Wait, Chigg. None of my characters have ever tried to save the world in Mork Borg. In fact, I think we've always just made it worse.
I mean, you can try. It almost certainly won't be enough. You're probably gonna make it worse. But I mean, hey, it never hurts to try. Now, it's very easy to take the tone of this game too far and make it a comedy. And if you and your table are okay with that, go for it. I liked Metalocalypse too. This is a great game for a Metalocalypse style humor.
Oh yeah.
So technically, one of the criteria was that we weren't going to do D20 based games. Yes, technically, Mork Borg uses D20 plus modifier resolution, but it's not the D&D. It's not the 5th edition's D20 system. It's different enough. The setting is different. The stats are different. The modifiers are different. It's a fun game. It's not a deep game. Don't go into this thinking you're gonna have some whirlwind romance or whatever with the queen. Mm-hmm. It's not for that. It's just for going out there and having stupid fun. But it is stupid amounts of fun.
Yeah. And again, Chigg, to specify our criteria, it can't be 5th edition or OGL D20. Mork Borg is perfectly A-okay. I don't think it has any OGL text in it. Or if it does, like, whatever, I'm just gonna keep it in here anyway.
They share the word "the" a couple of times, but beyond that, not much.
Yeah. All right, so let's go in for my next fantasy role playing game. Now, this is my personal favorite, and that's Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. You can play as a dwarf.
Played that one.
Yeah. Classic. Yeah, you could play as a dwarf peasant in Renaissance Holy Roman Empire. You can embody a halfling journalist investigating rampant corruption in the church. You can have fun as a human cultist being sacrificed to dark gods. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is the dark fantasy game that's also a black comedy RPG. The game is set in a world shaped like our own in the late 15th century, but one where dark gods of chaos maliciously prowl behind the scenes. It is a grim and dark world lit by torches. And for each light extinguished by treasonous magic, another one is put out by petty human incompetence. It's a lot of fun. I really like it. And of course, we have the Dark Hammer podcast here as part of Dark Days Radio, where we really delve into all these Warhammer settings, especially Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and its kind of classic setting from the 80s. So, Wolfrip 4th edition is the current edition, which runs off of a D100 system, which is pretty similar to one that was, released way back in 1986. It has a really cool career system, which allows for really interesting and unique character concepts. You could actually randomly determine what kind of character class essentially you are, what your starting career is, and it could be anything from a nobleman to a wizard's apprentice to a farmer or a peasant, as Chigg knows very well.
But can I start with a small but vicious dog?
You can, but only if you're a rat catcher. And by gaining experience, you can, and advances in your career, you can switch to another career eventually. You can exit out of the one you're currently in and move on to something else. From a wizard apprentice, you become a wizard. From a farmer, you can make a kind of lateral change to become a merchant, maybe. Maybe you finally got enough money and joined the Merchants Guild, and you can move up from there. And you can do very interesting combinations. You could start off as more of a fighty character, but then grow into more magical or maybe priestly devotions for your career, and have a basically multi-class in that sort of way, where you grow both strong in combat, but also have some magic to kind of fall back on. So it's a lot of fun. It's really cool, and I like it a lot, and would highly recommend it. But Chigg, there is one more game I found at the last minute which I think I'm going to have to recommend even more highly than Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay.
Listeners, we are going off show notes here.
There is no show notes for this.
Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay was the last thing on our list.
Chigg does not know what's going to happen.
I am on the edge of my seat. I paid for the whole seat. I'm only using the edge.
There is a really great dark fantasy role-playing game out there. It's been supported for over 30 years. It's not D&D. It's even better. It's a game that's grown beyond, that's transcended. It's got swords. It's got magic. It might have some D20s, but not the D20s you're thinking of. And it's got the wolf. And Chigg, we're talking about Palladium Fantasy Roleplay, the ultimate fantasy role-playing experience. It's never had a real edition change. It's never had any kind of real modifications to it. Yeah, there's a second edition technically, but it's still the same system. It's still got its wacky alignments and everything. And it's going to be supported until the day Palladium dies. And that's the game I think we got to recommend. Right, Chigg? Do you agree?
You know, when you were describing it, I said to myself, what game could this possibly be that's been supported for over 30 years? Surely I'd have heard of it by now. How could I have forgotten this? And then when you told me what it was, I remembered. I didn't forget it. I willfully misremembered that it existed. Yeah, Palladium Fantasy. That is an option. That is a thing that you can play if you have no other recourse, I guess.
Well, just think about it. You know, there's these people out there that say that Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition was the way that Gygax intended D&D to be. And Palladium Fantasy Roleplay is Kevin Sambita taking that and then doing God knows what with it. Putting in backflips and stuff.
Doing this with it. Making a selfish alignment, because there's no such thing as neutrality.
There certainly isn't.
So yes, dear listeners, Palladium Fantasy. It has always been. It will always be.
There's probably enough printed copies of Palladium Fantasy Roleplay at this point that everyone could own a copy.
I think that there's enough printed copies of Palladium Fantasy that you could build yourself a decent-sized house out of them.
Yeah. All right. Okay. That's enough of that. We're just having a little fun here, but
we kid because we love. Not. We don't love Palladium Fantasy. We love that such a thing can exist in this world.
Yeah. I mean, I've never played that. It might actually be rad. Maybe.
I mean, it uses the same system as Rift, so I will never play it.
I can combine it with Robotech, so that's an option.
That is technically an option.
Yeah. Anyway, Chigg, anything else we want to highlight before we close out this episode?
I don't think we can top that. So no, I think we're good. Mike, where can they find us if the listeners want to find us out there on the internets?
Well, you can head to our Linktree, which is linktree/DarkerDaysRadio, and that's got a link to all of our different social media. You can find everything there, but I really like to highlight our Discord, because that's where I hang out the most. And it's a great place to just go. We talk about miniatures a lot. We talk about role-playing games. If you have questions about World of Darkness or Chronicles of Darkness, we're always happy to discuss those there. Or if you just want to share funny memes about spooky stuff, it's great for that. And also, we have a Secret Frequency channel, which is pretty rad. So definitely check us out on Discord.
Yeah, I am literally there 24/7 because Discord is on my phone, and my phone is always on. So come join us. It's fun.
It's true. If you go in front of a mirror and type @Chigg, @Chigg, @Chigg 3 times, he will appear.
I will appear behind you, and I will fix your dishwasher.
All right, that's it for this episode. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Chigg, for coming on and having a great time. This was a speedy episode. I thought we were going to be talking for 90 minutes, but woof, it is a quick one.
Well, you know, we know what we like. We got to the point, and we hope we were informative to the listeners. And hey, if you want to hear more about these or any other games, we're on the Discord.
Definitely. And to all the listeners out there, take it easy and have a good night.
Stay safe out there.
This has been an episode of Darker Days Radio. Special thanks to Occam's Laser for the intro, outro, and new bumper music from their hit album, 9 Circles. Check out the rest of their work at occamslaser.bandcamp.com.